The Velhari had been watching humanity for 200 years before they made first contact. They studied human settlements from the dark side of the moon, cataloged human behavior, measured human military strength, and concluded, with the cold precision of a species that had conquered 43 star systems, that humans were manageable, not dangerous, not a threat, just another primitive civilization ripe for integration into the Velhari Dominion, which was a polite word for an empire that turned living worlds into resource colonies. First contact happened on a Tuesday. A Velhari diplomatic vessel descended over Geneva, and the world held its breath. The ship was enormous, 3 kilometers long, shaped like a crescent moon made of black glass, humming with energies that made every electronic device within 50 kilometers flicker and die. Ambassador Kael'vas stepped out in a form designed to be non-threatening to human eyes. Tall, slender, pale blue skin, large dark eyes. It had studied human facial expressions and wore something close to a smile. The handshakes were broadcast to every screen on Earth. People cried. People cheered. Children drew pictures of the blue aliens in their school notebooks. For 3 years, things seemed fine. The Velhari offered technology in exchange for mining rights on uninhabited moons. They shared medical advances, cures for diseases that had killed millions. They built cultural centers in major cities. They were charming and careful and measured, and humanity, still dizzy from the reality that it was not alone in the universe, leaned into the relationship with cautious optimism. There were protests, of course. There were skeptics. Military analysts flagged inconsistencies in Velhari behavior, the way their diplomats always steered conversations away from certain topics, the strange gaps in the technology they shared, the fact that no human had ever been allowed aboard a Velhari vessel. But the diplomatic machine rolled forward, and the warnings were filed away. The incident happened in Nairobi. A Velhari cultural center had been operating there for 8 months, running educational programs for local children. It was considered a model of interspecies cooperation. Parents sent their kids there on weekends to learn about the stars, to touch holographic displays of distant galaxies, to imagine a future where humanity sailed between suns. On a warm Saturday morning in March, 43 children between the ages of 6 and 11 entered that building. By afternoon, something had gone terribly wrong. The details that came out later were clinical in their horror. The Velhari scientists inside the facility had been conducting unauthorized biological experiments. They had been exposing the children to a compound, a neurological agent the Velhari used in the early stages of population conditioning on newly acquired worlds. It suppressed the development of certain higher cognitive functions. It made populations more docile, more compliant, easier to govern. The Velhari had done it to 11 other species before. They had simply decided to begin the process on humanity early, starting with the youngest, the most malleable. 31 of the 43 children collapsed before anyone realized what was happening. The remaining 12 were found in a sealed room in the lower levels, still conscious but confused and frightened. Emergency responders who entered the building reported a smell like burned copper, and 3 of them lost consciousness within minutes of exposure to the residue in the air. By nightfall, Nairobi's hospitals were overwhelmed. By morning, the story was everywhere. The Velhari response was immediate and calculated. Ambassador Kael'vas appeared on broadcast within 6 hours, expressing what it called deep regret over an unauthorized action carried out by rogue scientists acting without Dominion approval. It offered compensation. It offered to hand over the scientists responsible. It spoke in careful, soothing tones about the importance of the partnership between humanity and the Velhari Dominion, and how this tragedy must not be allowed to derail what had been built. It was a very good performance. No one believed it. Every intelligence agency on Earth began pulling threads simultaneously. The compound used on the children was not some rogue experiment. It was a standardized agent. It had a Velhari Dominion catalog number. It had a documented application protocol. It had been used, according to recovered data from the Cultural Center's own systems, with the knowledge of at least 3 Velhari diplomatic officials who had been present in Geneva for the past year, smiling and shaking hands and talking about the future of the galaxy. The Nairobi children who had been exposed were not dead, but they were not okay. Neurologists described the damage as subtle but pervasive, the kind of changes that might not fully manifest for years, Perhaps not until the children were teenagers or adults. Some would recover. Some would not. The youngest victims, two 6-year-old girls, showed the most severe signs. They sat quietly in hospital beds and did not ask for their parents the way children should. That specific detail, that quiet, broke something in the people who saw it. Governments began emergency sessions. Military commands went to elevated readiness. The 3 Velhari cultural centers and other cities were surrounded by security forces within 48 hours, their staff confined pending investigation. The Velhari vessels in lunar orbit powered up their drives, a movement that Earth's newly established orbital defense network flagged immediately, and which was interpreted, correctly, as a signal. A signal that the Velhari were preparing to leave before things got worse for them. The United Earth Defense Council met for 11 hours straight. Arguments were made for caution. The Velhari Dominion controlled 43 star systems. Arguments were made for restraint. Humanity had been in space for less than a century. Arguments were made for negotiation. Perhaps the damage could still be contained diplomatically. Then General Amara Osei of the African Coalition set a photograph on the table. It was an image taken by a nurse in Nairobi Central Hospital. 2 little girls sitting side by side in a hospital bed, holding hands, staring at nothing. Their names were Zuri and Amina. They were 6 years old. They had gone to the cultural center to learn about the stars. The room went quiet. Osei did not raise her voice when she spoke. She had the kind of stillness that comes to people who have already made a decision and are simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. They came to our world, she said. They smiled at us. They held our children's hands and showed them pictures of galaxies. And then they poisoned them. Not as an accident. Not as a mistake. As a process. As a procedure. As the first step in turning us into something easier to control. She looked around the table. They chose our children because children are the future. They wanted to take that future from us before we even knew it was being taken. She paused. I want every person in this room to understand what I am about to say. I am not angry. I am not afraid. I am decided. The vote was not unanimous. It was close to it. The official declaration was transmitted to the Velhari vessels in lunar orbit at 0300 hours Greenwich Mean Time. It was short. It was written in the Velhari's own language, using their own formal diplomatic syntax, so there could be no misunderstanding, no claim of mistranslation, no later argument about what humanity had meant. It said, "You harmed our children. You did it deliberately. You did it as part of a plan. There will be no negotiation. There will be no compensation accepted. There will be no version of this that ends with diplomacy. We are coming. Every star you have claimed, every world you have taken, every species you have broken, we are coming for all of it. This is not a declaration of war. War implies an outcome that is uncertain. This is a declaration of what will happen." The Velhari vessels left lunar orbit within the hour. They were fast. Humanity was already faster. Because while the diplomats had been shaking hands in Geneva, the engineers had been working. The military had been building. The scientists who had flagged inconsistencies in Velhari behavior had not simply filed their reports and gone home. They had prepared, not for this specific moment, perhaps, but for the possibility of this moment. For the possibility that the smiling blue aliens with the gift technology and the warm words might one day show their real face. The real face had shown itself in Nairobi. And humanity had been ready for longer than the Velhari knew. The Velhari High Command received the human declaration at 0317 hours and spent the next 4 minutes debating whether to be amused or concerned. The debate resolved in favor of amused. Fleet Admiral Soren Kale, who commanded the Dominion's 3rd expansion armada from his command vessel above the gas giant Thurus, 4, reviewed the human message twice, then set it aside and called for his morning briefing. He had conquered species before. He had received threats before. Once, the Dravathi, a methane-breathing civilization with surprisingly sophisticated railgun technology, had declared something similar before their final assault. The Dravathi had lasted 11 days. Their homeworld was now a mining station producing 17 million tons of processed ore per year. Humans, Soren Kale noted from the intelligence files, had been spacefaring for less than a century. Their fastest recorded vessel topped out at 0.3 light speed. Their weapons were kinetic and nuclear, powerful by primitive standards, completely inadequate against Dominion shielding. Their population, though large, was concentrated on a single world with a few scattered outposts. In Dominion terms, they were barely a species at all, more of a project. The conditioning agent in Nairobi had been premature. He privately acknowledged that. The timing had been wrong. They should have waited until the diplomatic phase was complete, until more cultural centers were operational, until the process was further along. The scientists had moved too fast. That was a management failure, and it would be addressed. But the response, this furious, chest-thumping declaration from a species that had never fought an interstellar war, was almost endearing in its boldness. He gave the order to reinforce the two Velhari systems closest to human space, as a precaution. Then he moved on to other business. 3 weeks later, the Velhari listening post at the edge of the Orion Nebula stopped transmitting. It was a small installation, automated, a relay station that bounced communications across the sector. Outages happened. Soren Kale's staff logged it, flagged it for maintenance, and scheduled a drone inspection. The drone never reported back. A second drone was dispatched. It also went silent. A crewed maintenance vessel was sent to investigate. It sent back 11 seconds of sensor data, fragmented, partially corrupted, before its signal vanished entirely. Those 11 seconds were analyzed very carefully. What they showed was a human vessel, but not any human vessel on record. It was roughly the size of a Dominion light cruiser, but its energy signature was completely wrong. Not the faint, stuttering output of human nuclear drives, but something denser, hotter, more controlled. The hull configuration was unfamiliar. The weapons discharge that ended the recording was a directed energy pulse of a type the Velhari's own scientists needed 4 hours to classify. Soren Kale looked at the analysis report for a long time. He sent an urgent request to Dominion Intelligence, full updated assessment of human military capability. The report that came back 3 days later was uncomfortable reading. Human space had been largely quiet since the declaration. No fleet movements, no visible mobilization, no dramatic military parades of new ships. Just silence. And in that silence, Dominion Intelligence had to admit something troubling. Its surveillance of human space had been degrading for the past 18 months. Monitoring drones had been going offline one by one, attributed to equipment failure. Communication intercepts had been coming back empty, attributed to human encryption upgrades. The entire intelligence picture of human military development over the past decade was, when examined honestly, almost completely blank. Dominion Intelligence had not noticed because they had not been looking carefully. Humans were not a threat. Humans were a project. You didn't surveil your projects the way you surveilled your enemies. That assumption was being revised at speed. Meanwhile, on Earth, the Aries program's first combat wing, 47 vessels built in underground facilities on 4 continents and 1 lunar installation, funded by a black budget that had existed for 16 years and been hidden inside the accounting of 40 different government agencies, was already in motion. The program had begun not because anyone expected this specific crisis, but because certain people in certain rooms had looked at the Velhari's trajectory across the galaxy, counted the species that had disappeared after integration, and decided that preparation was not paranoia. It was arithmetic. Commander Priya Vasantha stood on the bridge of the EFS Nairobi, named that morning, in the last hour before departure, by unanimous vote of the crew, and watched the star field shift as they cleared the heliopause at a speed no human vessel had officially ever reached. The ship's drive was not human in origin, exactly. It was human in execution, built by human hands, in human facilities, from human designs. But those designs had come from 16 years of very careful reverse engineering of every piece of Velhari technology that had passed through human hands. The medical equipment, the communication arrays, the environmental systems installed in the cultural centers. Every component, every wire, every crystal lattice had been studied with the particular intensity of people who suspected, very early on, that they were being smiled at by something that intended to eat them. The Velhari had been generous with their technology. Too generous, in specific ways. The technology they shared worked, and worked well, but it was always one generation behind their actual capability. Always enough to impress, never enough to threaten. It was the kind of generosity that keeps a dependent grateful and ignorant simultaneously. But they had made a mistake that no one in the Dominion had thought to prevent because no one in the Dominion had ever thought it necessary. They had let their cultural centers operate on human soil, with human staff, for 3 years. And human engineers are, by both nature and necessity, the most relentless reverse engineers in the known galaxy. They cannot encounter a mechanism without needing to know how it works. It is not curiosity, exactly. It is something older and more stubborn. The same quality that led them to build cathedrals before they understood structural load distribution, to sail across oceans before they had accurate maps, to reach for the moon with machines built from slide rules and intuition. They had looked at Velhari technology and they had understood it, and then they had improved it, because that is also what humans do. The 47 ships of the Aries program's first wing carried weapons the Velhari did not know existed, powered by drives the Velhari did not know were possible, crewed by people who had spent years training for a war they had hoped would never come and had prepared for anyway. Their first target was the Velhari relay network along the outer edge of the Dominion's expansion corridor, the communication infrastructure that connected Soren Kale's command to his forward positions. Without it, the Third Expansion Armada would be operating blind and isolated. The operation took 9 hours. The relay network that had taken the Velhari 40 years to build across 11 light-years of space went dark in 9 hours. When Soren Kale's bridge crew reported the communication blackout, his first assumption was a technical fault. His second assumption was a Dravithy-style last-ditch sabotage, some remnant of a conquered species still fighting. His third assumption did not come until a human vessel decloaked 30,000 kilometers off his command ship's bow, close enough that its hull markings were clearly visible on optical sensors, and broadcast a single message on all Velhari frequencies. The message was from Commander Vasantha. She did not raise her voice either. It seemed to be a human quality that Soren Kale had not accounted for, the stillness of people who have already decided. "This is the EFS Nairobi," she said. "Your relay network is gone. Your forward positions are isolated. You have 18 hours to recall your forces from every world, station, and installation in this sector. This is not a negotiating position. This is a countdown." She paused, and her voice did not change at all when she added, "The ship is named for our children." Soren Kale stared at the image of the human vessel on his display. He had 11 warships in immediate range. He gave the order to engage. They were very fast. But the Nairobi was faster. And it was not alone. The battle above Thurus lasted 4 hours and 22 minutes. Military historians would later call it the first true interstellar engagement in human history, which was accurate, and also deeply inadequate as a description. It was the moment the Velhari Dominion realized, with the particular horror of the suddenly corrected assumption, that it had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Soren Kale's 11 warships were Dominion standard, well-armored, well-armed, crewed by veterans of 7 previous expansion campaigns. They had never lost a fleet engagement. They operated with the smooth confidence of forces that had never truly been challenged and had started to mistake their own invincibility for a property of reality. They formed up in standard assault configuration, a crescent formation, the same shape as their diplomatic vessels, which was either poetic or deeply ironic depending on where you stood, and they came at the human vessels with everything they had. The human ships did not form up. They scattered. This was unexpected. Every species the Velhari had fought had sought formation. It was the natural instinct of military units under fire to cluster for mutual support. The scattering looked, for a moment, like panic. Soren Kale interpreted it as fear. His ships pursued, splitting their formation to chase individual targets, and that was exactly what Commander Vasantha had counted on. The EFS Nairobi ran at what looked like full speed toward the outer ring of Thurus 4's moons, low, dense moons with enough gravitational interference to disrupt targeting sensors. 2 Velhari cruisers followed. They were faster in a straight line, and they closed the distance steadily. What they didn't detect, because the moon's interference had also degraded their long-range sensors, were the 4 other human vessels already in position behind the largest moon, drives cold, sitting silent in the dark. The ambush was textbook. The 2 Velhari cruisers came around the moon's curve expecting to catch the Nairobi in open space and found themselves bracketed on 4 sides simultaneously. The exchange lasted 40 seconds. Both Velhari ships were disabled, not destroyed, disabled, a distinction Vasantha had insisted on in her orders, because disabled ships could be boarded and disabled ships contained information before either could effectively return fire. The same pattern played out across the engagement zone in 9 separate simultaneous engagements. The Velhari fleet, split by pursuit, encountered human vessels that fought nothing like any enemy they had faced before. Other species fought to survive. They formed defensive clusters, they tried to retreat, they attempted surrender negotiations mid-battle. Humans fought as though the concept of retreat had not been explained to them, and as though they had somewhere important to be afterward. They used terrain, moons, debris fields, the gas giant's upper atmosphere, as active tactical elements rather than obstacles. They communicated in ways that left no detectable signal, coordinating attacks that arrived from multiple angles with a synchronization that suggested something between long practice and genuine intuition. When it was over, 9 of Sorenkale's 11 warships were disabled and boarded. 2 had been destroyed when their captains attempted to trigger self-destruct sequences, a standard Dominion protocol to prevent capture of command systems. The humans had known about the self-destruct protocol. They had jammed it on 7 of the 9 ships they took. On those 7 ships, the command cores were intact. Sorenkale's own ship was the 3rd vessel boarded. He was taken alive, which he had not expected. He had prepared a speech, a formal statement of terms for surrender, calibrated to acknowledge defeat while preserving Dominion dignity. He did not get to deliver it. The boarding team that secured the bridge was not interested in speeches. They were interested in the ship's data core and in reaching it before anyone on the bridge could wipe it. They succeeded. The data core of a Velhari command vessel contained things the Dominion had never imagined losing. The full communication encryption protocols for the sector. The navigational charts for 43 Dominion systems, including approach vectors, defensive positions, and resource station locations. The full record of every species the Velhari had subjugated or destroyed, going back 300 years. And tucked in a classified subdirectory that required 4 separate encryption keys, which the boarding team's intelligence specialist cracked in 11 minutes. A fact that visibly disturbed Sorenkale more than the boarding itself. The complete documentation of the conditioning agent used in Nairobi. Its formula, its mechanism, its application history across 11 species. And the clinical projections the Velhari scientists had prepared for humanity. Dosage schedules, expected cognitive impact timelines, projected readiness for what the documents called full integration within 2 generations. The boarding team specialist, a young man named Tariku who had grown up 3 kilometers from Nairobi Central Hospital and whose younger sister was one of the children currently showing neurological symptoms, sat in front of the Velhari command core and read those documents for 20 minutes without speaking. Then he flagged everything, transferred the data, and did his job because the mission was not done. Back on Earth, the data began arriving in fragments. Medical teams seized on the conditioning agent documentation immediately. The complete formula and mechanism, finally exposed, meant that researchers who had been working blind for months now had a full map of what they were fighting. Within 72 hours, 3 separate research teams announced early-stage treatment protocols. They were not cures, not yet, but they were beginnings. Real ones. And the strategic data, the navigational charts, the system maps, the defensive configurations, went immediately to the Aries program's command structure, which had been waiting for exactly this kind of information. The first wing's operation had been planned largely from inference and captured fragments. The second wing, 49 additional vessels that had been completing final systems checks in the lunar shipyards, now had something far more valuable, a complete roadmap of Velhari space. The Dominion High Council convened an emergency session on the Velhari homeworld of Velkara when the news from Thurus arrived. The session was chaotic by Velhari standards, which meant voices were raised and 3 council members stood simultaneously, which had not happened in living memory. The consensus, when it finally formed, was that the 3rd expansion armada needed to be recalled and reinforced, that humanity needed to be contained before the situation escalated further, and that the original diplomatic approach needed to be revisited. The word negotiation was used several times. The word extinction was also used, though applied in the opposite direction from how humanity had used it. The Council sent a communication to Earth, a formal request for ceasefire talks, framed carefully, designed to sound like generosity rather than fear. It pointed out the disparity in dominion versus human military resources. It offered reparations for Nairobi on a scale that would have seemed significant 3 months ago. It suggested the incident had been a misunderstanding that further conflict would only compound. The response from the United Earth Defense Council was short enough to be read in 30 seconds. It said, "You have 43 star systems. In each one, there are species you broke, worlds you stripped, civilizations you reduced to labor pools. We have seen your records now. We know what you did to the Dravathi. We know what you did to the Selhari. We know what you did to the Muntaith, whose last transmission we found in your archives, sent to no one because you had already destroyed everyone who might have heard it. You thought Nairobi was a beginning. It was. But it was not the beginning you planned. We are coming to every system on your maps. We are not coming as conquerors. We are coming as the thing you never prepared for because you never believed it could exist. We are coming as a consequence." The council member who read the response aloud paused at the last line, something in his voice shifting slightly. "We are coming as a consequence." The Dominion High Council voted to begin emergency military mobilization of its full First and Second Fleets, a force that represented the largest concentration of Velhari military power in 2 centuries. It would take 60 days to assemble and position. The Council believed 60 days was enough time to create a defensive perimeter that even the humans could not penetrate. They had not yet finished reviewing the data from Thurus, for they had not yet fully understood what they were looking at. And they did not know, could not have known, because the information had never existed in any form they might intercept, that the Aries program had not 2 wings. It had 7. The Velhari High Council's 60-day mobilization plan made one assumption that seemed so obvious no one thought to question it: that humanity would wait. The assumption was wrong by 53 days. On the 7th day after the response to the ceasefire request was transmitted, the 2nd and 3rd wings of the Aries program entered the Velhari system of Orinketh, a mid-tier Dominion system hosting 2 active mining installations and a military logistics depot that supplied 1/3 of the sector's frontline vessels. The attack was simultaneous and unhurried. There was no declaration, no countdown warning this time. The human vessels entered the system at maximum drive, coordinated their attack vectors with a precision that left the garrison's response window somewhere between inadequate and theoretical, and dismantled the logistics depot in 2 hours and 14 minutes. They did not destroy the mining installations. Instead, they broadcast on every frequency the Velhari used, a message not to the Dominion High Council, not to the military command, but to the workers, to the beings running the machines in the ore processing plants, a species called the Murii, small and quiet, with dark eyes and 4 arms, who had been integrated into the Dominion 40 years ago, and who worked their shifts in silence because there was nothing left to say. The message was in the Murii language. Human linguists had spent 3 months with the captured Velhari archives reconstructing it, and it said, simply, *, you are not property. You do not have to stay. We are not here for you. We are here for them. * 1140 Murii workers walked out of those mining installations in the hours that followed. They had nowhere to go and no ships to go therein. The human vessels that were supposed to be long gone had stayed. They took every Murii aboard who wanted to come. It cost them 6 hours and made their departure window significantly more dangerous. Commander Vasantha, reviewing the mission report from the 4th Wing's command vessel, read that detail twice. Then she sent a personal commendation to the captain of the EFS Lagos, who had made the call to stay. The captain's name was Reyes. He had 2 daughters. He did not say that in his mission report. He did not need to. The 4th, 5th, and 6th Wings hit simultaneously on day 12. 3 separate Velhari systems, each chosen for strategic value: a weapons manufacturing hub, a communication relay center, and the fuel processing station that supplied the assembling First Fleet. The fuel station was the critical target. Without it, the First Fleet's assembly timeline stretched from 60 days to something closer to a year. The Dominion would understand this immediately, which meant the 7th Wing needed to be in position before the Dominion could respond. The 7th Wing had been in position for 4 days already. They were waiting at the edge of the Velkara system, the homeworld, not to attack it. The orders were explicit about that, and the reasons were both tactical and something harder to name. Attacking a homeworld when the enemy had not yet been beaten in the field turned liberation into massacre and consequence into vengeance. And the distinction mattered, even now, even with everything that had happened. But being there, visible on the Dominion Zone sensors, a human fleet sitting calmly at the doorstep of the Velhari homeworld, that was a message that no communication could deliver as clearly. The Dominion High Council received the news of the fuel station's destruction and the 3 simultaneous system strikes within hours of each other. The council chamber was not chaotic this time. It was very quiet. Quiet in the way that happens when the shape of a situation suddenly becomes clear, and the shape is much worse than anyone had prepared themselves to see. Fleet Admiral Soren Kale was in a human holding facility on a converted or freighter that now served as a mobile prisoner transport, and he was, by accounts of the guards who monitored him, completely still. He had been still since the boarding. He ate. He slept. He did not speak unless spoken to, and when he did speak, his answers were brief and careful and entirely uninformative. He was a professional, and he was processing, in the particular private silence of intelligent people confronting the fact that they have fundamentally misunderstood something important. He had misunderstood humans. He had read the intelligence files, and he had seen the numbers, the population, the resources, the technology level, the decades of spaceflight, and he had assembled from those numbers a picture of a species. A picture that was accurate in its individual facts and completely wrong in its conclusions. Because the facts said primitive and the conclusions said manageable, and neither of those words accounted for the thing that humans actually were, which was something the Velhari did not have a category for. They were not primitive. They were patient. There is a difference between a species that does not have something and a species that has decided not to reveal it yet. The Velhari had never learned to make that distinction because they had never needed to. Every other species they had encountered had revealed everything they had as fast as they could, because every other species had believed that showing strength was the way to avoid being conquered. Humans had believed the opposite. They had smiled and shaken hands and let the cultural centers operate, and quietly, underground, in the dark, for 16 years, they had built the thing they would need when the smiling stopped. They had built it for their children. Because that is what humans do. They look at their children and they build toward the future those children will inherit. And if something threatens that future, the building changes character entirely, becomes something faster and harder and more total than anything built from ambition alone. On day 19, the Dominion High Council requested a meeting. Not a ceasefire. Not a negotiation. A meeting. The distinction was important, and the council had chosen the word with great care, because a meeting implied listening, and they needed humanity to understand that they were willing to listen now in a way they had not been before. The request was transmitted to Earth and also, separately, to the EFS Nairobi, because the council had determined that Commander Vasantha was the appropriate person to contact. Not because of her rank, which was significant but not the highest in the human command structure, but because her ship's name said something about what this conflict was really about, and the council was finally paying attention to what things said. The meeting took place on a neutral station, a Muriai outpost, actually, which both sides accepted without comment, though the symbolism was not lost on anyone. Vasantha attended with a small delegation. The council sent 3 members, which was a significant reduction from the usual 12 and was understood to be a gesture of something like humility, or the Velhari equivalent of it. The council spoke for a long time. They acknowledged the Nairobi incident, not as a rogue action, but as a deliberate policy. They acknowledged what the archives showed about the Dravathi and the Selhari and the Muntaith. They did not apologize, exactly. Velhari did not have a linguistic structure built for apology at an institutional level. But they stated facts that had previously been denied, and they stated them without the careful framing that had characterized 3 years of diplomatic language. And in the context of everything that had happened, that was something. Then they asked what humanity wanted. Vasantha had prepared for this question. She had written the answer herself, reviewed it with the Defense Council, revised it 17 times over 3 weeks, and arrived at something that said exactly what it meant. Humanity wanted the Velhari Dominion to release every subject species. All 43 systems. Every world, every installation, every labor camp and resource colony. The species living there would determine their own futures. The Velhari could keep their homeworld and their original colonies. the worlds they had settled before they became an empire. They could keep their ships, enough to sustain their population and defend their home system. But the empire was finished. The council member who received this looked at it for a long time. "And if we refuse?" he asked. Basantha looked at him without particular anger or excitement. She had the same stillness Osei had, the stillness of decided people. "You have 43 systems," she said. "We have 7 fleets, and we started building the 8th last month, and we have not stopped for a single day since this began. You are very good at expansion. We are very good at something else." She paused. "We are very good at finishing things." The council agreed to the terms. It took 4 months to implement. 4 months of human vessels present in Dominion space as observers, as guarantors, as the visible fact that the terms would be honored. 4 months of Murai and Dravathi survivors and Selhari remnant communities beginning the slow, enormously complicated process of determining what their own futures looked like after decades of Dominion control. Humanity did not direct that process. They provided transport, resources, medical assistance, and the simple fact of their presence as proof that the Velhari would not simply reverse course the moment human attention shifted. Zuri and Amina, the 2 6-year-old girls from Nairobi, were 11 years old when the last Velhari vessel withdrew from the final Dominion system under the terms of the agreement. Neither of them fully understood what had been done in their name, and in the names of all the children like them, and in the names of 11 species who had never had anyone do anything in their names at all. But Zuri was doing better. The treatment protocols developed from the stolen Velhari data had been refined over 5 years of intensive research. She still had quiet days. She probably always would. But she also had loud days now, days where she asked her mother 40 questions before breakfast and wanted to know how starships worked and whether she could visit one someday. Her mother said yes, someday. Tariku, the intelligence specialist from the Nairobi's boarding team, heard that story from his sister, who had heard it from a friend who worked at the hospital. He was stationed on a human outpost near the edge of what had been Dominion space when he heard it, and he was not the kind of person who cried easily, and he did not cry then either. He just sat for a while with the feeling, in the particular quiet of space, and then he went back to work. Humanity had a lot of work left to do. They always did. But they had been here before, at the edge of something vast and difficult and uncertain, and they had always found that the edge was never really the edge. It was always just the place where the next thing began. And so they did what humans have always done at the edges of things, what they have always done when the world is larger and harder and stranger than anyone prepared them for. They looked at it, and they went forward.